How do you plan rich learning experiences when you're overwhelmed by curriculum demands and you're strapped for time? Today, I'm going to share with you the way I plan. And unbeknown to me until very recently, it's also the way a classical curriculum works and the way that Charlotte Mason structured her lesson. So if you want to learn how I reduced overwhelm and spend less time planning lessons, then stay with me until the end where I'll give you a link to my brand new lesson plan that nurtures all those essential skills and saves you hours of planning time. What I found whenever I became anxious about the planning, it's because my eyes were wandering. I was looking at what colleagues were doing, and that was causing me a huge amount of stress and overwhelm because I was looking at my colleagues and then second guessing myself. And then those feelings of not being good enough used to creep in. And that's when the overwhelm started. I think for me, that comparison trap was something I had to learn to kick to the curb. So if you're starting to feel overwhelmed with everything you have to do, or actually you think you have to do, because quite honestly, I think we actually put way too much pressure on ourselves and we do and plan for more than we actually need to. I think we create a lot of unnecessary work that we don't need to create, and it puts extra pressure on us. And I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. The first step to getting rid of overwhelm is just to put blinkers on, just to focus on what you're doing in your four walls and forget about what everybody else is doing. Nothing causes more anxiety than the comparison trap when you're comparing yourself to others. So take a step back and start trusting yourself. And if you're new to this game, maybe you're a graduate, or maybe you're just going to start out homeschooling and you're starting to experience those feelings of overwhelm start creeping in, then I would say the next thing to do is to get yourself a mentor, someone you can piggyback on, someone that you vibe with. Sometimes it may be a colleague. Sometimes it could be someone online, like me, for example. But don't just follow this person mindlessly. They have to share your values. So for me, for example, I value growth mindset. I value curiosity. I value problem solving skills and analytical skills and creativity. So make sure that whoever you choose values the same kinds of things that you value. And so, for example, you might value these things that I value. So if you are following me because we share the same values, thanks. And also don't forget to hit that subscribe button or the follow button wherever you're watching or listening, either on YouTube or on a podcast. Thanks for being here and being with me. Now, you have to make sure that whoever you decide that you are going to follow or that you are going to see as a mentor, that they actually share your values, because otherwise you are going to end up miserable. Now, since we do share the same values, I think you'll want to hear about the lesson plan that I've got for you. So hang on, stay with me, because I'll be sharing that with you towards the end of the show. Now, the next way that I found to deal with overwhelm so that planning didn't suck the complete joy out of everything I did was to integrate lessons. In other words, to plan lessons that meet multiple outcomes from different subject areas. And for me personally, I found that the best way to do this was through picture books. And by the way, that's another thing that I've been noticing lately in mainstream learning. And that is this tendency that a lot of educators have stopped reading to children in classrooms. And now they're showing the cartoon or the book on a YouTube video. I wrote a blog post about this, where I shared the research done by the Reading and Literacy Discovery Center of Cincinnati Children's Hospital, which proved the benefits of reading books to children on their cognitive development. And another study done by the same hospital explored different formats of stories on children's brains. They looked at audio only, they looked at picture books being read to children, and the cartoons of picture books on a video. And what they found was that when picture books were read to children, it showed very well developed visual and language networks in children's developing brains. The picture book gave children a starting point to bring the words and imagination to life. The audio version required their brains to work a little bit harder because they had to figure out what was happening in the story. But when it came to watching the cartoon version, the researchers found that things started coming apart because basically there was too much information for the children's brains to handle. Because brain networks develop gradually and children need multiple exposures and lots of practice to keep building those networks and make connections. As children become better readers over time, they're better able to use those connections to see the pictures in their mind and use their imagination to make sense of the story, which then helps them to progress to pictureless or chapter books later on. I'll leave a link for you in the show notes or the description of the blog post with the research so that you can go and read it there. So now we know that using picture books is a great starting point for any lesson because of the cognitive value for children. But don't just grab any picture book off the shelf. You need to be strategic. You need to choose a book that's going to help you meet multiple lesson outcomes that will cover multiple subject areas, because that's how you reduce your planning time. The first thing I do when I choose a picture book is I choose one that has rich language. Does it have descriptive language? Does it use direct speech? Does it have an element of inference so the children can use the text and the pictures to make meaning? And does it in fact have great illustrations to fill in those comprehension gaps the children might have? I also look for a book that has a story mountain, that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, so that you can teach children the structure of stories, because they eventually will be writing those stories for themselves. And of course, the story, as I said before, must link to other subject areas. So whatever you want to teach, either in science or geography, or make sure that that picture book covers that topic that you want to teach. Now, once I've chosen the book, I'm going to read the story to the children to kick off the lesson or the unit or the topic, and I'm going to read it every single day. And each day, I'm going to focus on a different aspect of the story. Perhaps on one day, it will be they've got to draw and write their favorite part of the story. Perhaps another day, it'll be something to do with inference about the character. Perhaps another day, I'm going to ask them to recount the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story. Perhaps on another day, I'm going to focus on the problem of the story. And perhaps another day on the resolution of the story. I'm sure you get the idea. And so now here's another thing that I actually discovered quite late in the game. We've all done it. I did it. Is that we planned lessons around a book, but then we planned a new book for every week. So absolutely understandable that we're all burnt out. And nowhere does it say that we all have to do one book a week with lessons and ideas that go with that. So why would we do that to ourselves? And that's coming back to that point I made earlier, is why do we put so much pressure on ourselves? There's really no reason to do that. We're making teaching young children more complicated than it needs to be. And we all know that children are not going to remember a thing when we just keep piling things on. That's shallow teaching and shallow learning. As educators, if we really want learning to be deeper, then we need to slow down. We need to make everything slower. And when we slow down, children are actually going to remember more of what they're being taught. And remember when I said in the beginning about that study, that children's brain networks develop gradually and that they need lots of practice and repetition? Well, if we keep giving them a new book every week, how's that going to happen? So stick to just one good book with those activities. Read it repeatedly every single day with a new activity or a different activity. so that children can get a much deeper understanding so that they can really have good comprehension. Now, of course, you're not just going to read this one book, this one that's the catalyst for all your learning. You're going to be reading other books too. You're going to read other picture books. You're going to read other books on the same or similar topic that you're doing, or other picture books just for fun. But you won't be doing all the activities associated with those other books. You're going to just be focusing all your activities on the one picture book that you chose that's going to be doing the heavy lifting. But you're still going to be reading other stories as well. And of course, you're going to ask questions. You might be asking, so what's similar about this book that we're reading to our other story that we're doing our activities on? Or what's the difference between the two stories that we're reading? And each time that you're reading a new book and a new story and asking them questions related to the book that you've chosen, the one that's a catalyst for your learning for this topic, they are going to be making more brain connections. They're going to be learning more. They're going to start making connections between stories, between books, between the topic. Their brain networks are going to get stronger and they're going to start building their schema. Now, the next thing that's important for me is that this picture book that I've chosen has to link, as I mentioned before, to the subject that I'm teaching. So it has to link, although I'm teaching English from it, I'm also going to teach another subject, be that science or geography or history or anything else. And if you've chosen a really good book, this book has to do the heavy lifting because you don't want to have to rack your brain every single week to find new activities to do. So the way I go about it is I look at this book and I start brainstorming. As I read through the picture book myself, I start brainstorming what kind of activities can I create with this book. And I always think back and I remember planning with a colleague in this way, and it was the best way to plan. And it actually made planning joyful because you're brainstorming and coming up with all these fabulous ideas of what this book can do, how you can integrate art, how you can integrate sculpture, how you can integrate technology, how you can integrate design and anything else. Because you want the book to meet multiple curriculum outcomes across multiple subjects. And when you choose this book that covers these multiple areas, you can go really deep. You can slow everything down and you can really get into the nuts and bolts of the book without having to rush. This is what makes learning joyful. It's that whole rushing thing where we feel that we need to, meet all these curriculum outcomes. But if you choose a really good book, you can meet all the curriculum outcomes. But you just have to go slower and deeper so the children actually remember and learn, because isn't that what we're actually doing in the first place? And if this book is really doing a good job, you should be able to get 5 weeks, 6 weeks, a term of activities to do just with one picture book. And of course, in early childhood, those activities should be hands-on because children learn through doing. And we want children's brains to get working. So we want them to use their hands as well. Because if you're just going to give them worksheets, then you've got to mark those worksheets as well, adding to your workload. So don't you think there could be a better way of assessing children's understanding and their knowledge than just a worksheet? A way that can save you time. And again, this is something I learned quite late in my teaching journey. Like most teachers, I was under the impression that everything had to be on paper, that children needed to write everything down, so that I then could prove that I had done the teaching and they had done the learning and I had covered the curriculum areas. And so I think that's the other pressure that we feel, because we feel that we need to do our job and someone's going to come and check up on us. So we have all this work that we get children to do on worksheets and in their books so that we can actually show how very busy and productive we've been and we've done all this stuff. But then a few weeks later, you ask children a question and they can't even remember what the topic was about. They can't even remember what they learned. So what was the point really, except put ourselves under more pressure and stress? And I was doing all this stuff and putting extra pressure on myself, just like we all do, until the lights came on. And I realized that I could actually assess children's understanding in other ways, just by observation and listening and asking them questions. And I could then record them and then look at that recording on the same day and input my observations in my record keeping sheets, which, by the way, those are the exact same record keeping sheets that are on the website that I use in my classroom. And they would be so valuable when it came to reporting or when it came to talking to parents, because I then already had those observations written down, ready to go. I'll leave a link to my record keeping sheets in the show notes and in the description for you as well. To recap, before I tell you what I have for you, the first step to reducing overwhelm is to stop comparing yourself to others and to start trusting yourself. The second step is to follow a like-minded mentor, someone who shares your values. The third step is to choose a picture book that does the heavy lifting for you and to stop making your life more difficult and more overwhelming by choosing a new book every single week. And then the next step is to wring out as many activities as you possibly can with this one picture book. And here's the cherry on the top. In the beginning, I said to you that you'd probably follow someone who shares your values. Now, by this time, you hopefully know me and you know my values are inquiry. My values are critical thinking, analytical thinking, getting kids to be creative, right? So my lesson plans that I create, not just for the children that I teach, but for you too on my website, are the same lesson plans that I use. They tick off those boxes. They are for deeper, slower learning. Because these lesson plans are also hands-on. They get the children to do the work, not you. The children must do the work. We are just guides and facilitators, but they have to do the work. They have to do the learning. Their brains are the ones that have to learn and make connections. And in the lesson plans that I create, I give you the questions that you need to ask for the lesson plan. I give you the metacognition prompts for children to start thinking about the best way that they learn. I give you the ideas and strategies on how to use the lesson plan. I give you a student workbook if that's something that you want. And of course, the lesson plans are all differentiated because every teacher and all the students and your cohorts will be different. So you can use it and tweak it to suit you and to suit the students that you teach. Now, a favorite picture book that you'll see all over Pinterest and all over TPT, and probably that every early childhood teacher reads, is Me on the Map. Now, my lesson plan for Me on the Map is not one of those generic ones. My lesson plan is chock full of hands-on activities that really give children a sense of their place in the world. It's not one of those shallow lesson activities where you read the book and then you do that activity with the little circles that you cut out. I'm sure you've seen it. I think that even I did those lesson plans many years ago until I started to realize that I was bored out of my mind. And if I was bored, surely the children were too. And that's when I started thinking about lessons that can go deeper, lessons that teach kids skills, not just we read the book and then we color in something and then you ask them in 3 weeks' time about what their town is, the name of their town or their suburb, and they don't even know. So it's deeper learning, it's slower learning, it's helping children discover exactly where they are in the world. So as you start planning for the new term, the new semester, the new week ahead, why not dip your toe in and try and start with a picture book that you can go really deep with? Not just read and then do a coloring in lesson or a worksheet. Not just tick off the English box and then do a craft that you can hang up on your wall to show that, now you've done it and the kids were busy. But something a little slower, a little deeper, a little bit more enjoyable for you as well as for the children that you teach. If this is something that really resonates with you, I'd love you to try my lesson plan for Me on the Map. This lesson plan will take the pressure off you. And quite honestly, you cannot put a price on that. So I'll leave a link to me on the map lesson plan for you in the show notes or in the description if you're watching this on YouTube. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. So go be blooming curious, get that lesson plan, see how it goes. If you resonate with my values, then that lesson plan will resonate with you. So by the way, I start my new job this week. I will be in my room setting up, cleaning, scrubbing, getting things ready for my kindy homeschool group next week. So I'll be in the thick of it just like you, and I will share that with you as we go through it together. So make sure that you subscribe here on YouTube and that you follow on the podcast, and we'll see how that goes. So until next week, stay blooming curious and take care of yourself.